Let's come back from the lunch break, please. My name is Felicia Orth, hearing officer in EIB 21-27. We have reached the 1 o'clock public comment session. Let me share with you the names of the folks who reached out to the board administrator by email. I'll call on you in this order. Adelia Smith, Marla Painter, Janet Carter, Carl Braithwaite, Michael Sells, Stacey Slay, Stan Renfro, and Lori Costello. If you're on the platform and I did not just call your name and you'd like to offer comment during this session, please reach out through the chat. Chat is enabled for everyone, and I'm happy to accept your comment. Let's see here. I find Adelia Smith. Hello, this is Felicia Worth. Can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you.
There. Are you Mr.
Yes,
Smith?
D. Stiff.
Hello. Um, I would like you to spell your name,
Yeah.
please.
Adel.
Yes. Mr. Smith, are you still
Hear me.
speaking? You're unmuted, but I'm not hearing anything.
I have no.
Sorry?
Hello.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Jack.
I think you might be breaking up, Mr. Stith. Cheryl, for the transcript, the name is Adelious
Delay.
Stith. Mr. Stith, it's clear to me that your microphone is going in and out. You're unmuted on the platform, but it seems your sound isn't reliable. It might
Oh,
help.
that's too bad.
Oh, wait, I just heard that. Keep speaking now. I'll start your 5 minutes.
But it is a delay. I am Adelia Smith, and I am here in the northwest side of Albuquerque. And I'll answer just a couple of the questions that I guess you've presented. Does the oil and gas industry impact me? Well, it impacts me in a way that it allows us to benefit from the revenue that it produces. And it also, of course, benefits the community and impacts me in a way to being able to move around in the vehicles and so forth that we have, and being able to have the natural gas and so forth. All of us benefit from the oil and gas industry, being that it's 35 to 40% of the revenue benefits us because of our ad valorem. It's covered by a portion of our schools are funded in that way, as well as the general fund. So I think the oil and gas industry does provide impactful benefits for our community. Conducted on behalf of the New Mexico Environmental Department to show that gas emissions has a negligible effect on reducing the ozone. Yet, as a member of the public, I'm being that the proposed ozone precursor rule will improve air quality. Is the science behind this statement, or where does the data come from to support this assertion to dive into something that has not been presented to us before, an area that we've never gone before, but yet we're ready to dive into it. And I certainly hope the reading, it appears that the state's own model doesn't support the proposed ozone. Like New Mexico Environmental Department should refocus its efforts on reducing pollution in general and one industry in the state. Growing up in Baltimore City and learning from my mother, any type of targeting in order for a particular way to be addressed, or that's just plain on discrimination. Hope that we're not discriminating against any particular industry in order to have an outcome that is desired. The oil and natural gas industry is proactively working to reduce the risks, to taking action to limit emissions of methane and other greenhouse gases. I've seen research producers are investing in new technology and equipment, adopting to leading best practices across their regulatory approaches, recognizes and encourages the adoption and the development of creative solutions to reduce. Ladies and gentlemen, I just hope that this will be thoroughly looked at and not just jumped on the bandwagon or in today's culture. But I sure hope that all would be researched, not just following opinions, and we will do what's in the best interest for the state of New Mexico, the people of New Mexico. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seth. Let me go to Ms. Painter next. She's on the platform. I do not see her on the platform. I did see one call-in user, though. Let me see. Call-in user number 9, I'm unmuting you. Would you identify yourself, please? Who is this? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. Call-in user number 15, I'm unmuting you. Would you identify yourself, please? Hello? No. Okay, those are the 2 call-in users I see. I don't see Ms. Painter on the platform, so let me move to Janet Carter. Janet Carter. I think I saw Ms. Carter. There's Ms. Carter. Ms. Carter, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. I will. My name is Janet Carter, and
hold on one second. Ms. Carter, hold on one second. First, I need you to spell your name.
Carter is my last name, and first name is Janet.
Thank you. And if you would raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 5 minutes now.
And I will not take 5 minutes, but thank you. I wanted to speak just very briefly about some of these proposed regulations, and particularly about the ozone precursor rules. Oil and gas pollution are taking a toll on our air, water, and health in New Mexico, and it's particularly has an effect on rural and tribal communities, and of course, as children. There's very high rates of asthma and other respiratory ailments in this area, and it's of course been exacerbated with the pandemic. I do support our governor's call for nation-leading strict oil and gas pollution rules, and I think that the EIB must strengthen the proposed ozone precursor rules because we want to protect those who live in the areas close to these to production, to oil and gas production. And an important way we can do this, for example, is by adopting regulations that require more frequent inspections of the equipment, inspections that would check for leaks. Cutting down leaks in the oil and gas production equipment can make a big difference in the emissions. And this has been implemented successfully in Colorado. And I think it's an important thing that we should consider doing. And I think we should look at other means that we can cut down the existing emissions, leaks, and oil and gas that's leaking in these production areas to keep the air as clean as possible. We owe it to our children and to our grandchildren. We've had a very hot, dry, warm summer. We're going to have a lot more in the future. And not only do we need to transition to clean energy, we need to make that the fossil fuel energy that we still have and still produce much more climate friendly and reduce emissions every way we can. And that's all I want to say, but I want to thank you for the time to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carter. We'll move then to Carl Braithwaite. I remember Mr. Braithwaite was on the board a long time ago. Hello, Mr. Braithwaite.
Hello, I'm surprised you remember. Thank you for remembering.
Of course.
I was the chair.
Yes.
Spell my name?
Yes,
It's
you would.
Karl.
Yeah.
The last name is Braithwaite, Braithwaite.
Thank you very much. And if you'd raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I'll start your 5 minutes now.
Okay, thank you. Yes, in the mid-1980s, I was the chair of the Environmental Improvement Board. We adopted a number of good provisions, but we couldn't get everything done that needed to be done, and we're still working on it now. I'd like to address a couple of specific things. One is, I think it's really important that this legislation, these regulations, have very strong self-reporting requirements from the industry across the board. We have just a handful, I think maybe 7 inspectors now in the state. They will never be able to cover the land that needs to be covered. But if they receive full, honest reports using new technology to track their own emissions and understand them, they'll probably be surprised a bit at how much they impact the environment. And so it's important that not just some of the old techniques of monitoring be required, but there's many new ones. We're learning some very interesting things from remote monitoring, even space and airplanes. And if we don't have that, we know in the future there's likely to be pressure on state governments when the economy goes down a bit. We don't want that to occur. So a self-reporting requirement will make it so that we have the data that we need and even allow citizens to participate in assisting. So I think that's a really key point, and I want to make that very strongly. My second point is when it comes to the ozone precursors, we've known for quite a while that the ambient air quality criteria documents that help zero us in on pollution have faced delays that I think were not warranted, but happened. And so we're behind in this area, and it's very good to see the Environment Department moving forward with some very substantial ozone regulations that will be very beneficial to the public. It's important that the communities close to those emissions are kept in the forefront. There are many other parts of this regulation to address. I think it's a good job, and I would urge strengthening it in a few key areas. And I thank you very much for the time to participate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Braithwaite.
Thank you for remembering me. It's nice.
We had a good time. We'll move then to Michael Sells. See if he's on the platform. Ah, I see you, Mr. Sells. Can you hear me? Mr. Sells? I've unmuted you. Can you hear me? It might help to call back in, Mr. Sells. We can't hear anything at all. Move then to Stacey Slay. Here we go. Ms. Slay, can you hear me?
Can I ask you to hang on just a second? I am here. I'm sorry. I am speaking to a medical provider. I have a growth on my eye that's got to be removed, and the call just came in, so I apologize, but I cannot speak now.
All righty. We'll try again.
Thank you.
Stan Renfro is next. Mr. Renfro?
Yes.
Hello. If you would please spell your name.
Renfro.
Thank you. Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 5 minutes now.
Greed causes methane bleeding. 1 million tons of methane visible from space occludes the Earth from sight above New Mexico. Wells churn across the street from Lybrook Elementary School and up against people's homes and hogans, laying waste to people's lives and health each day. But it's what those flares and leaks represent that make me see red. It's so wasteful, so poorly conceived. As a society, we squander, squander, squander. The methane that's flared or leaked into the atmosphere is natural gas, after all. The same natural gas we use to heat our homes, boil our pasta. Lest we forget, in 2014, NASA revealed the methane anomaly in the Four Corners region years ago, years ago, years ago. It's still there. Is seeping gases, is rusting pump jacks, is poison wells, is crashing, is cracking pavement. Great horned owl is watching us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Renfro. Let's go back to Mr. Sells. Mr. Sells, can you hear me?
Yes.
Terrific. I can hear you as well. If you would spell your name, please.
Michaelsells, last name.
Thank you. And raise your right hand. Do you
Okay.
swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. I'll
Sorry.
start your 5 minutes now.
Okay. Well, I'm an Episcopalian priest here in Farmington. I serve 3 congregations in Upper Fruitland, Farmington, and Orfano. I've been here for 3 years. I moved here in 2018, and I'm surprised because the people in my congregation have asthma. And long time ago, people came to the Southwest for the good air. They came there were sanitariums and to get well. And it just struck me as odd that in rural northwestern New Mexico, there would be a large concentration of people fighting asthma. I mean, these people never lived in Los Angeles, Chicago, or LA, or New York. and they had asthma. And I learned from my colleague that there was the ozone, the air here is not the best. And it just struck me as very odd that today these people are in their 70s and 60s and they've lived here all their life and they're battling asthma. And then on top of that, with the fires in California and the surrounding areas, it's they have to go inside their homes. I mean, this is northwestern New Mexico. It's a place where the sunshine, and we're supposed to enjoy the sunshine and the air, and people come here to live here. And I'm just a little concerned about that. It just strikes me as very odd for some place in rural northwestern New Mexico to have so many people in my congregations battling asthma. It just strikes me as very, very odd. And on top of that, I'm not against the oil and gas industry. I want to make sure that the people in my congregation have jobs, they have food, shelter, and clothing for their family. I don't want the oil companies to start, you know, how the oil companies can play with their employees and say, oh, the environmental groups want this, so they're going to add all this to your workload, boom, 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 on top, all these checklists. And so then they get the workers agitated and against environmental groups and saying, oh, and then they're going to increase their workload and to go through the checklist to make sure there is no leakage. And there just these companies know how to agitate these employees and play with the people. And so there's an agitation between our environmental groups and people who gain a living from the oil and gas industry. So I know the regulations are done and written, but I want to ensure that the employees are not pushed to their limits. Safety is of utmost importance, and I don't want them to just add to their work lists. I mean, some of them work 12, 14-hour shifts. And when you're doing a checklist and you live in the community and their children are growing in the community, I'm sure they're concerned about the air quality in their communities. Their grandparents, their children, their spouses live in the same community, and their spouses are fighting asthma, but that's where they give their livelihood to put food on the table. So I don't want to be manipulated by these companies. And these regulations give some sense of power to the community, give some sense of power to the employees. So those are the things on my mind. I serve Work for No community. I work with the communities in Nageezi, Counselor, and we see a bunch of new equipment coming in there, and we see them burning off the excess. And you listen to the grandmothers, and they talk about fracking, and you hear about the deformed animals, the deformed sheep, the deformed cows, and it just sends an awful chill down my spine about this is how these people are living out in Werfeno, Nageezi. And there's tension there because their children are working with the oil and gas industry. They get their little tiny checks from the oil and gas industry. And so there's a bit of a tension, and I think these regulations will help ease that if they're well written to protect the community, protect the employees.
Would you wrap up, please, Mr. Sells?
Yes, and that is all I have to say, Miss Ma'am.
Thank you so much. All right, we'll go back to Mr. Slay, and then Ms. Costello and Mr. Beale. Let's see, Stacey Slay. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yes. All right, if you would please spell your name.
Sure, it's Miss Stacey Slay, STACIE SLAY.
Thank you, and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes,
Thank you. I'll start your 5 minutes now.
thank you. And as I said, I am Stacey Slay, and I live in La Plata, New Mexico, which is about 10 miles northwest of Farmington. I would like to thank the Environmental Improvement Board for this opportunity to provide my comment. So thank you very much. I have MS and a hole in my heart, and have lived in this community since 1996. I mentioned my medical issues because they are of issue to your regulations. I live in a small community north of Farmington, and we have several families out here, age ranging from the very young to the very old, other people with problems just like me. And we're surrounded by oil wells, gas wells, mainly gas wells. And your regulations can go a long way to determining my health in the future, as well as all of these families. I appreciate everything you've done so far and push you to try even harder, even faster to make certain changes that will improve not only the health quality of everybody involved. These changes can also help climate. They can also help tourism here. And as I heard from in the earlier testimony, a lot of people have some physical challenges, medical challenges that they really had waited for years for regulations to be put in place that we can count on to impact our health and quickly. Some of us don't have much longer to live. But anyway, I wrote some things down that I wanted to keep on track with. So I just wanted to mention that the satellite photos show enormous amount of methanes completely covering the Four Corners area. While the NMED has put forward strong proposals, there are three critical improvements that the EIB should make to protect communities and address major sources of pollution. And first would be to protect the living closest to development by requiring more frequent inspections to find leaks. And, if that means more people to go looking, fine. There's more technology. You can fly planes over now. Anyway, back on track. Ensure strong requirements for operators to control pollution during the completion of an oil well as well as a gas well. And as far as redevelopment of existing wells are concerned too. Also, we need to strengthen requirements to cut pollution from pneumatic controllers. Big problem here. The smell around here can be awful, but pneumatic controllers are used in oil and gas production. The devices are the second largest source of oil and gas methane emissions in New Mexico, and I can testify for that. Amen, brother. NMED should require companies to inspect pneumatics for leaks and accurate and timeline to retrofit equipment to zero bleed or zero emission pneumatic controllers. I apologize. I have brain damage, so speaking, especially under time limit, is not always good for me. But anyway, that is the main portion of it. Largely, the oil and gas leaks are avoidable. They are harmful emissions to everybody, wildlife, climate, everybody. It's carcinogenic even. But thank you for considering these points, and I appreciate the EIB for allowing me to have this time to stumble over these concerns of mine.
Thank you very much, Ms. Slay. We'll go now to Lori Costello. Let's see, Ms. Costello, I've unmuted you. Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, good. I can hear you as well. If you would please spell your name.
Lauricostелlo.
Thank you. And raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 5 minutes now.
Thank you. Greetings from your neighbors to the north. My name is Lori Costello. I'm a retired family physician living in, Durango, Colorado, which is in La Plata County. Rather than comment on the details of your proposed methane regulations, I'd like to review some of the history of the federal methane rule and why I think state laws are especially important. Our La Plata County Commissioner, Gwen Lackelt, was instrumental in the late Senator John McCain's deciding vote to pass the federal methane rule during the Obama administration. It was one of many Obama-era protections that later came under attack. President Trump proposed a stay on the methane rule for new fracking wells. In July 2017, I joined Don Schreiber and others in Washington, D.C., where we testified before the EPA in opposition to the stay, that is, to uphold the application of the methane rule to new fracking operations. Here is a portion of my testimony, which is still relevant today. I'm currently living in Durango, Colorado, under the vast Four Corners methane cloud. These clouds are usually associated with urban areas, but this one, the largest in the country at 2,500 square miles, is rural. With the dramatic increase in fracking and associated fugitive emissions, methane is now a rural health issue in the very communities that are least equipped to deal with it. Furthermore, the Native American population in northwest New Mexico has suffered significant and numerous health effects from fracking wells that are only now being documented. The Indian Health Service has been ineffective in diagnosing these issues, let alone treating them. A stay on the regulations for methane capture in new wells is reckless. They are the very wells that should be state-of-the-art for protection of public health and of the environment. Ours were among a total of 116 comments in opposition to the stay, that is, comments in support of upholding the methane rule. There were 2 comments in favor of the stay, one reportedly from the oil and gas industry. Nonetheless, the stay was approved, showing the complete dismissal of public input. According to Keating Research, the oil and gas industry in Colorado favors our stricter rules that require them to find and fix methane leaks. These rules improve efficiency and worker safety while decreasing methane pollution, and the costs are minimal if not outweighed by the increased revenue from captured natural gas. Researchers at Colorado State University have documented asthma attacks in children that are caused by the oil and gas industry. They are directly related to the number of fracking wells. In 2018, Colorado ranked 3rd among the states with upwards of 32,000 such childhood asthma attacks annually, while number 1 Texas had almost 145,000. Although New Mexico is not one of the top 20 states for childhood asthma attacks caused by oil and gas, you sadly have 2 entries in the top 30 counties in the US for these asthma attacks in children. Lea County is number 2 and Eddy County is number 29. Again, let me remind you that was 2018 data. Although I am a staunch supporter of federal protections for public health, including universal health care, it is painfully obvious that the federal government is unable to provide them. The most recent rating of America's most and least trusted professions, as reported by Forbes in 2018, ranks nurses, as usual, as most trusted, followed by physicians and pharmacists. Car salespeople are second from the bottom. Below them are members of Congress. They are the least trusted in our nation. That's US Congress. This is why it is imperative for New Mexico to enact meaningful methane protections. Furthermore, air pollution increases susceptibility to COVID infection, and people with respiratory conditions are at higher risk of serious COVID illness and death. Unfortunately, in Colorado, despite our 2019 legislation requiring priority of public health over fracking profits, our governor has failed to hold industry accountable during the pandemic. I wish you all the best as you seek to protect all of us from the known and preventable adverse health effects of methane and its co-conspirators in air pollution-related death and disease. Thanks for listening. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Dr. Costello.
You're welcome.
All right, I'm going to go to Andrew Beale. In the event you're on the platform and you haven't already spoken, please reach out in the chat. I'm happy to call for you. And in the event you have any trouble with the chat, please reach out to Pam Jones at 660-4305. Mr. Beale, can you hear me?
Yes,
Mr.
I
Beale?
can hear you.
Oh,
Can you
you're
hear me?
very soft. Can you speak up?
Yes, how's this? Can you hear me
Wow,
now?
it's hard to hear you.
I'm sorry, I can't do anything. Please go to your next caller.
Okay, thank you. You can also put your comments in writing to Pam, and I'm happy to call on you again if you get a better connection.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Bye. All right. I don't see anyone else in the chat. Let me look for Ms. Painter again. No, I don't see her. All right, let's return to the technical case. I believe Ms. Gutierrez. Oh, I see Ms. Sheehan. Rushing to Kinder Morgan. Very sorry. Ms. Sheehan, I believe you're going to call two more witnesses on behalf of GCA.
That's correct. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. The GCA will now present its next two technical witnesses who will be discussing the monitoring requirements set forth under Section 113C of the proposed rule. I will begin by calling Mr. Copeland, who will be testifying regarding Section 113C3 of the September 16th version of the rule, followed by Mr. Randy Bartley, who will be testifying regarding Section 113C4 of the September 16th version of the proposed rule. In the interest of efficiency, although they are testifying regarding different subparts of Section 113C, I propose to offer them both up at the same time for questions to the parties or the boards or the board members may have at the conclusion of Mr. Bartley's testimony, if that's acceptable.
Yes, thank you very much for suggesting that. I think that's best.
Excellent. I will begin with Mr. Copeland. Do not see him as a panelist yet. Oh, there he is. For everyone's benefit, the exhibits associated with Mr. Copeland's testimony regarding Section 113 are GCA Exhibit 15, Mr. Copeland's advanced written direct testimony, and GCA Exhibit 16, his resume. Mr. Copeland, have you already provided your name for and been sworn in by the court reporter?
Yes, I have.
For the record, Mr. Copeland has already adopted his pre-filed written direct and rebuttal testimony in this proceeding, and both have been entered into the hearing record along with his resume. Mr. Copeland, did you provide pre-filed direct testimony concerning Section 113 of the proposed rule?
Yes, I did.
What is the general purpose of your direct written testimony in this proceeding regarding Section 113 of the proposed rule?
My testimony relates to the engine maintenance requirements in Section 113. The purpose of my pre-filed direct written testimony is to explain why the engine maintenance requirements within 113C1 should be modified and expanded to allow engine owners to deviate from the minimum manufacturer required maintenance schedules.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland. Have you reviewed NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 23, which is the September 16th version of the rule?
I have.
Are the GCA's proposed amendments to Section 113 incorporated in NMED Rebuttal 23?
They are not.
Are your concerns regarding Section 113 of the proposed rule fully addressed by NMED's amendments to that section as set forth in NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 23?
Although the department's amendments to Section 113 are set forth by NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 23 are different than the amendments GCA proposed with respect to engine maintenance standards, the department's amendments do appear to allow owners operators to use the type of maintenance plans that we develop and utilize in compliance with existing federal regulations. Therefore, my concerns with section 113 are addressed by the department's revisions in this section and set forth by NMED's rebuttal exhibit 23.
Would you encourage the Environmental Improvement Board to adopt the department's section 113 provisions as set forth in NMED rebuttal exhibit 23?
I would.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland. Does that conclude your testimony on this section?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. Madam Hearing Officer, turning now to Mr. Randy Bartley. Mr. Bartley's testimony addressed the GCA's proposed amendment to emissions testing requirements for engines in the department's May 6th version of the proposed rule. Since that time, NMED has adopted the GCA's changes to section 113, which is currently set out in section 113C4I in NMED rebuttal exhibit 23. The GCA has offered a minor amendment to that adopted provision of the rule, which it has presented to the parties as GCA exhibit 35. NMED has indicated that it has no objection to these amendments. Given this cooperation and in an effort to streamline this proceeding, I propose to present Mr. Bartley, have him adopt his written testimony in this proceeding, briefly summarize his rebuttal testimony, and then offer him up for any questions others may have.
That sounds like a good way to go. Thank you.
Excellent. And just for everyone's benefit, the exhibits associated with Mr. Bartley's testimony are GCA exhibits 25, Mr. Bartley's pre-filed direct written testimony, and GCA exhibit 26, his resume. I would now request that he be sworn in.
Okay. Mr. Bartley, if you would raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And please spell your last name for the court reporter.
It is B-A-R-T-L-E-Y.
Mr. Bartley, will you please state your name for the record?
Good afternoon, Madam Hearing Officer, Madam Chair, members of the Environmental Improvement Board. My name is Randy Bartley.
And what is your current employment position?
I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Envirosafe LLC, doing business as BAIR, B-A-I-R. We're an environmental consulting and emissions testing company.
Can you please briefly describe your educational and professional qualifications?
Sure. I received a Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of Oklahoma in Energy Management with a minor in Finance in December of 2003. I've been working in the oil and gas industry for the past 26 years. I have over 20 years of experience related to emission testing natural gas compressor engines. And through training and experience, I've become familiar with the emission standards that apply to sources in the oil and gas industry, including engines, as well as the emissions testing requirements for those sources. I'm familiar with and have conducted emissions tests using both portable analyzers and traditional stack testing equipment for engines and other sources.
Thank you, Mr. Bartley. A copy of your resume has been provided as GCA Exhibit 26. Is this correct?
That is correct.
And you have submitted pre-filed direct written technical testimony in this proceeding, which has been provided as GCA Exhibit 25. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Do you have any changes to your direct pre-filed written testimony?
I do not.
Do you adopt your pre-filed direct written testimony here today?
I do.
Mr. Bartley, could you please share on your screen GCA Exhibit 35? Madam Hearing Officer, could you please give him sharing privileges? Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Bartley. Mr. Bartley, have you reviewed NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 23, the updated version of the proposed rule?
I have.
Are the GCA's proposed amendments to Section 113C3 of the proposed rule adopted in NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 23?
They are.
Are your concerns regarding Section 113C3 fully addressed by NMED's amendments to that provision as set forth in NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 23?
They are not.
Could you please explain why they are not?
Yes. While NMET included the GCA's proposed revisions to section 113C3 by adding new subparagraph I, the department made additional revisions to what is now section 113C4 that creates the need to further amend the language of what is now paragraph 113C4I of Exhibit 23. The earlier version of the proposed rule indicated that a portable analyzer could be used for both initial and annual testing. As it has now been revised in NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 23, the rule language now suggests that portable analyzers can only be used for the subsequent annual testing and not initial emissions test for engines. As stated in my direct testimony, CO is a reliable surrogate for showing compliance with the hydrocarbon emissions standard, regardless of whether you're testing using a formal EPA reference method test or using a portable analyzer. Therefore, CO should be able to be used as a surrogate for non-methane, non-ethane hydrocarbons, NMNEHC, in the initial performance test and subsequent annual testing.
Do you have any suggested ways to correct this issue?
I do. I suggest simply removing the language for emissions testing using a portable analyzer from paragraph 113C4I in NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 23 as shown in GCA Exhibit 35.
Is it your understanding that the department supports this change?
It is.
Thank you, Mr. Bartley. Does this conclude your rebuttal testimony in this proceeding?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you. You can stop sharing your screen now, I believe. Madam Hearing Officer, before I offer both witnesses up for questions, I would like to move for the admission of GCA Exhibit 35 into the hearing record.
Thank you. Let me pause for a moment. I don't remember an objection to that one. Oh, that's the one you sent yesterday, I think. All right, let me pause for a moment in the event there's an objection to GCA Exhibit 35. I hear nothing. It's admitted. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.
All right. If any other party has a question of this GCA panel, please turn on your camera. I see Ms. Katz.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I just have one question because I need to be clear because I did have Ms. Keene state in her presentation that discussed this provision and stated that we were adopting that change. So did you hear that, Mr. Bartley?
Yes, that change is being adopted.
Yes. Did you hear Ms. Keene's testimony to that effect just a little while ago?
Yes, ma'am. This morning I did.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Katz. Are there any other parties who have questions of this GCA panel? Not seeing anyone else, I'm going to turn to the board for their questions. If you're an attendee on this platform, please reach out through the chat with any questions. Madam Chair?
No questions at this time. Again, just want to reiterate, I'd like to see the collaboration between the various parties on resolving some of these details. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Cates?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Bitzer?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Garcia?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Member Hunker?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Ms. Sheehan, I think your panel has escaped without fierce interrogation. So thank you very much, gentlemen, Mr. Copeland and Mr. Bartley.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.
And thank you, Ms. Sheehan. I think now we're to Kinder Morgan. I see Ms. Gutierrez on the screen. Ms. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. So consistent with our discussion this morning, I'd like to put up a panel of 3 witnesses, have them present their testimony, and then make them available for cross. To additionally expedite this hearing process, we are prepared to provide some rebuttal regarding engines and turbines, but we would like to reserve the opportunity to respond to any proposal or presentation that NPS puts up on Friday if the parties are amenable to that.
I think we have to agree to that, Ms. Gutierrez, because NPS will be taken out of turn. I see Mr. Brindley on the screen.
And Miss Leslie Nolting, who you've had the pleasure of meeting, and then Mr. James Trent.
Okay, I believe I made them all panelists. All right, so I believe we've heard from Ms. Nolting. Let's start with you, Mr. Brindley, if you would spell your name, please.
Certainly. First name Vincent, Vincent. Last name Brindley, Brindley.
If you would raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Now I see Mr. Trent on the screen. Mr. Trent, if you would please spell your name.
James, James. Trent, Trent.
Thank you, and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
Thank you, and just make sure you keep your voice up for the transcript.
Correct.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. For the benefit of the board and the parties, this testimony will relate to Kinder Morgan Direct Testimony Exhibit 6 and Rebuttal Testimony Exhibit 13. And Madam Hearing Officer, would you please give me sharing permissions, please? I will introduce Mr. Brindley while we do that. Mr. Brindley, where are you employed and what is your current position?
I am employed by Kinder Morgan. I am a technical supervisor for Division 2 of Kinder Morgan.
And how long have you been in that? Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped already. Could you please briefly describe your duties in this position?
Certainly. I supervise 4 engine technicians and 3 control specialists, and I provide direct support to the company's compression facilities, including reviewing engine analyses and maintenance work.
And how long have you been in that position?
For approximately 10 years, but I've worked for Kinder Morgan and its predecessor companies since 2000.
And did you submit written direct technical testimony at Kinder Morgan Exhibit 6 on the requirements and the proposed rules related to engines and turbines?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes to that testimony?
I have no changes.
Do you adopt your written testimony here today?
Yes, I do. I adopted in full.
Let me get the slide deck up. Okay. Could you please summarize for the board your testimony regarding engines and turbines?
Yes, of course. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. Thank you for the opportunity to present technical testimony today. My presentation is really just to present to the board an introduction to engines and turbines as they are used in the transmission segment. Because of the department already gave us some background, I will be very brief and be available for questions. As a transmission company, Kinder Morgan's function is to move the gas from across long distances to residential, commercial, and industrial customers. We operate approximately 15 reciprocating compression engines and 15 combustion turbines in New Mexico that we anticipate will be subject to these proposed rules. In other words, there's approximately 30 units that will exceed the relevant horsepower thresholds in tables 1 and 3 and are located in the counties subject to this rule proposal. These engines and turbines make the movement of natural gas through our transmission system possible. This slide just shows there are numerous transmission compressor stations along the pipeline network. The engines and turbines recompress the natural gas at each station to push it along to the next station. I wanted to quickly give some context for these engines and turbines. These are very expensive and very large. On the slides shown, you can see a reciprocating integral engine on the left and a turbine, combustion turbine with compressor on the right side. A compressor reciprocating engine typically weighs at least 100,000 pounds and can weigh as much as 365,000 pounds. Similarly, a combustion turbine can weigh more than 165,000 pounds. Keeping the size of these machines in mind is important when considering certain possible outcomes of the requirements of these rules. For example, if a control would require an engine site to be reconfigured, this could require disassembly of the machine itself, which, as you can see, would be a significant undertaking. The costs for new engines and turbines are also very high. A new engine can cost $300,000 for a sub 1,000 horsepower engine to as much as $7 million for an engine larger than 5,000 horsepower. The price of a new turbine can range from close to $7 million for a turbine of approximately 10,000 horsepower to more than $10 million for a turbine of approximately 30,000 horsepower. In each case, not including engineering and installation costs. That's simply the cost of the hardware. And because of the size and complexity of these machines, it takes months and sometimes years from the time an engine and turbine is ordered until the time it is received, installed, and ready for operation. So this concludes my portion. I'll pass this to Ms. Lesling, my colleague.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brindley. Ms. Nolting, could you please introduce yourself? I think you may be muted if you're speaking.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. It's good to see everyone again. My name is Leslie Nolting, and I am an EHS manager at Kinder Morgan, and my position focuses on air permitting and compliance.
Ms. Nolting, did you submit written direct technical testimony at Kinder Morgan Exhibit 6 regarding the requirements and the proposed rules related to engines and turbines?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes to that testimony? And if not, do you adopt your testimony here today?
I do not have changes to my testimony, and yes, I adopt it in full.
Thank you. Could you please summarize for the board your testimony regarding engines and turbines?
Yes, happy to. Good afternoon, Madam Hearing Officer, Madam Chair, and board members. Thank you for the opportunity to summarize my testimony on engines and turbines. I will be brief, as NMED has accepted our proposed changes on the two issues that I'll discuss, and we understand there are no objections to these changes. I will just describe these briefly for the board because although these are agreed upon, they are important changes. First, for emergency engines, we requested a clarification that aligned the reference to emergency engines with federal rules, and NMED has agreed to those changes so as not to disrupt the use of emergency engines in emergency situations when they are needed. We also asked for clarifying changes in reference to the requirement to maintain and repair engines and turbines consistent with manufacturer's recommendations. As NMOGA noted and NMED discussed, manufacturer recommendations may be outdated, and reference to good engineering and maintenance practices is an appropriate alternative. Thank you for your time today, and I will pass this to Mr. James Trent on a few of our higher priority issues.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nolting. Mr. Trent, can we do a quick mic check? I think you may be muted, Mr. Trent.
That could be true. Now
There we
can you hear
go.
me?
We can hear you now. Glad we did the mic check.
Yep.
Mr. Trent, where are you employed and what is your current position?
I'm employed by Kinder Morgan. I am a staff engineer.
And how long have you been in that position?
I have been in this position for about 11 months. However, I've worked with Kinder Morgan or its predecessor companies on engines and turbines and air quality matters for over 20 years, including as the engineering manager for 7 years.
Thank you. And can you please describe your work experiences for us?
Yes, in my current role, I work in the engineering design group, focusing on developing scopes for emissions retrofit projects and compression, expansion, and replacement projects on all of Kinder Morgan's interstate systems. I also work as part of a company-wide team finding solutions to achieve compliance under new and proposed rules in New Mexico, Arizona, New York, Pennsylvania, and Colorado. In my prior role, I was the manager of the compression engineering and emissions compliance testing group, overseeing a total of 20 employees. My responsibilities included overseeing the scope of new business development projects, which included, without limitation, selecting the type of horsepower that will be installed on these new projects, overseeing emissions controls technology projects with legal and operations and EHS to address emissions reductions, and developing FERC form data and undertaking special projects.
Thank you, Mr. Trent. Did you submit written direct technical testimony at Kinder Morgan Exhibit 6 regarding the requirements for engines and turbines?
Yes.
Did you submit written rebuttal technical testimony at Kinder Morgan Exhibit 13?
Yes.
Do you have any changes to either your written direct or rebuttal testimony set out in Exhibit 6 or 13?
No changes.
Do you adopt the entirety of your written testimony here today?
Yes, I adopt my written testimony in full.
Thank you, Mr. Trent. Could you please summarize for the board your testimony regarding engines and turbines that you will provide today?
Yes, I'd be glad to. So good afternoon, board members, Madam Hearing Officer, Madam Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss engines and turbines with you today. I'll be presenting on two topics today. First, I'd like to briefly highlight certain changes that the department has made between the May draft of the proposed rules and the most recent September 16th draft of the proposed rules. The changes I will cover are listed on the slide under the first bullet point. I won't spend much time on most of these, but at the board's request, we do want to highlight changes that have been made that Kinder Morgan supports. After that summary, I will address you just a couple of points clarifying the department's direct testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Trent. And could you just please briefly run through for the board the NMED's revisions in the September 16th draft that Kinder Morgan supports?
Yes, I'd be happy to. The changes we support are shown on this slide, and I just want to tick through them quickly and address a few points in support of a few of these changes that are particularly important for the board to understand. The department revised standards for new and existing engines, and we can support these standards. We would also support NMOGA's proposed revision to increase the CO standard to 2 grams, which would assist with the interplay between potential NOx and CO emissions. I do think it is worth noting that even though Kinder Morgan can support these standards and the standards in Table 3, as I'll discuss next, I don't want it to get lost that meeting these standards will still require a significant investment to retrofit our engines and turbine fleets. That said, we have said from the beginning that with reasonable regulation, there are opportunities for emissions reductions with respect to engines and turbines, and we believe these standards strike an appropriate balance. Additionally, NMOGA put on a sound testimony objecting to the National Park Service's proposal to regulate all engines of all sizes. In other words, including small engines that the department has not currently proposed to regulate. In an effort to streamline this hearing, we will not reiterate those important points, but Kinder Morgan supports NMOGA's objections to these unreasonable proposals.
And Mr. Trent, I might just ask one clarifying question in that NMOGA has reserved its opportunity to present that testimony until Friday. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Please continue.
The department has revised the standards for new and existing turbines, and we support these standards. I'd want to pause on this Table 3 and briefly talk through how important these changes are. The revised standards for existing turbines are critically important. For turbines in the 1,000 to 4,000 brake horsepower range, the only control option for achieving 50 ppm, which was the original proposed limit, is selective catalytic reduction, or SCR. As NMOGA's witnesses described earlier, SCR is a type of post-combustion control system, meaning that it is applied after combustion occurs in the engine or turbine. This is different from other control technologies, which are applied to the combustion process itself and tend to be cheaper than SCR. A very important point on this issue is that other control technologies, like water or steam injection, are not available for many turbines in this 1,000 to 4,000 brake horsepower size category. Our turbines in this size category are manufactured by Solar Turbines. Water injection is not available for many Solar Saturn turbine models. Even where water injection could theoretically be an option, it is not clear that this would be an advisable control technology considering the large volume of deionized water that it would require. These points were made clear in Solar Turbines' written testimony. It is important to note that at 50 ppm NOx standard, our GE Frame 3 turbines, which are larger than 4,000 horsepower, would also require SCR. For our GE Frame 3 turbines, a representative from Baker Hughes, which is a GE company, communicated to us that there is no NOx abatement system, including no water injection system, available for these units. I provided this letter as attachment T to my rebuttal testimony. We also support the changes for new turbines in the 1,000 to 4,000 brake horsepower size range, and we flagged that these revisions are also critically important. I'm not aware of any new turbine in this size range available on the market that meets 25 ppm NOx without added controls. This slide shows a list of all the different manufacturers we investigated to determine whether a unit of this size could meet the threshold. The answer was no to all of them. This means that because SCR is the only option for turbines of this size, the original proposed 25 ppm NOx standard would force operators into installing costly SCR controls even on a brand new unit. Another important change that the department made and that we are asking the board to adopt was to add a compliance schedule for retrofitting existing turbines. Originally, the proposed rules required turbines to be retrofitted within only 2 years. Because we operate roughly in equal numbers of engines and turbines that would require controls, and because turbines are just as time and cost intensive to retrofit as engines, we proposed a compliance schedule for turbines similar to the existing schedule for engines, which NMED incorporated. Finally, I'd like to highlight 2 relatively minor but very important revisions that the department made in response to party testimony, including Kinder Morgan's. First, the department revised the provision that allows an operator reduced engine hours in lieu of compliance with the emission standards to make clear that only emissions reductions equivalent to those achieved under the standards themselves would be required. They also added the same provision for turbines. We support both of these changes. Second, the department added a sentence in the engine load equation making clear that if a manufacturer's rated brake-specific fuel consumption is unavailable, the operator can use an alternative methodology. We have run into this issue several times, so we appreciate that this change has been made, and we ask the board to adopt it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trent. Could you now please summarize for the board your testimony regarding Kinder Morgan's clarifications to the department's direct testimony?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I want to briefly address the NMED's cost estimates. Their testimony regarding the availability of engine upgrades on certain older engine units. The department provided a number of cost estimates in its direct testimony. These estimates centered on the cost to control engines and turbines to the NOx and VO standards as originally proposed. For that reason, certain of the numbers are no longer relevant now that the standards have been revised. However, we think it is important to clarify a few differences between our anticipated control costs that we submitted in written testimony and the department's estimates. First, For certain costs, it appears that the department averaged cost across older and newer units. In our experience, it can be significantly more expensive to retrofit an older unit than a newer unit. Because of this differences, averaging newer units with older can distort the real cost of retrofitting older units. Second, for the cost to control NOx from existing turbines smaller than 15,900 brake horsepower in size, it is our understanding that the department did not include SCR cost in their overall cost per ton estimate of $4,076. Although the NMED provided SCR cost on these units for comparison. I understand from the department's spreadsheet that to arrive at this $4,076 cost per ton estimate, NMED only included the cost of installing water or steam injection. This is presumably because it believed that water and steam injection was a viable control option, and it selected it for evaluation because it is cheaper. As we discussed, this is not true in most cases. Evaluating only water or steam injection likely resulted in underestimating overall costs. Where the department did evaluate SCR for turbines larger than 15,900 brake horsepower, those estimates are lower than our anticipated costs. Similarly, the department cost estimate to control VOCs by installing oxidation catalysts are also lower than our anticipated cost. I'd also like to briefly address the department's testimony regarding the availability of certain engine upgrades. They testify that there are upgrades available for several engines to meet a NOx limit of 0.5 grams per brake horsepower hour. While that is true, in the interest of ensuring that the board has as much relevant information before it as possible, and to add on to what Mr. Lozowski testified for NMOGA, I'd like to point out that there are certain older engine units that no service company has been able to upgrade to enable them to meet a 0.5 gram per brake horsepower hour NOx standard. For example, the manufacturer Worthington makes a 1,200 horsepower SLHC model engine that cannot be upgraded to meet a 0.5 gram per brake horsepower hour NOx standard. Also cannot be upgraded to meet 0.5 grams of brake horsepower hour NOx standard. We recently added emission controls to 2 of these mainliner units in Texas and Pennsylvania. The best NOx emissions that we could achieve was about 5 grams per brake horsepower hour, even with spending several $1 million on controls. This reality of limited availability of upgrades on certain engines supports the need for alternative compliance options, which I'll talk about in greater detail shortly. Even with the tables 1, 2, and 3 as proposed, certain technologies remain to achieve the standards for every unit. Recognizing this fact, the department has proposed 2 alternative compliance options that are listed on this slide. Kinder Morgan supports these proposals. I'll move now to my SIR rebuttal testimony to explain why it is critical for the board to adopt the proposals as
Madam Hearing Officer, I don't know if you're also having a delay from Mr. Trent.
Yes. He should slow down, and we should pause until he figures out the connection there. It might help if he turns off his video.
Mr. Trent,
Okay.
I think we just lost you on your talking point to slide 25. It was cutting in and out a little bit. So if you want to restate that point, and then we'll shift to your SIR rebuttal.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right, let's see. All right, even with the tables 1, 2, and 3 as proposed, certain technological and economic challenges remain to achieve the standards for every unit. Recognizing this fact, the department has proposed 2 alternative compliance options that are listed on this slide. Kinder Morgan supports these proposals. I'll move now to my SIR rebuttal testimony to explain why it is critical for the board to adopt the proposals as currently drafted by the department.
And thank you. If folks will just bear with me as I transition to the new slide deck. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for your summary of your direct and rebuttal testimony. Mr. Trent, could you please summarize your rebuttal testimony regarding the alternative compliance options related to engines and turbines that the department has proposed?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Before I begin, I just want to say that the addition of the alternative compliance options to account for technical and economical infeasibility is absolutely to Section 113.
Mr. Trent,
Estimates to control our units to the proposed standards, the cost on certain of those units would be very, very high. Because of this, having one or more.
Mr. Trent needs to speak more slowly.
Okay,
Mr. Trent,
sorry.
I think we lost you again at the beginning of the talking point to slide 3 on this deck. It was cutting in and out again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right. Before I begin, I just want to say that the addition of the alternative compliance options to account for technical or economic infeasibility is absolutely critical to Section 113. Based on our estimates to control our units to the proposed standards, the cost on certain of those units would be very, very high. Because of this, having one or more option for alternative compliance is essential to this rule. For this reason, and as the department has described, it is proposing 2 alternative compliance options. The first is an alternative compliance plan, or ACP, which involves grouping units and achieving equivalent total reductions from some combination of controls across that group. The second is alternative emissions standard for individual engines or turbines, which can be used in the event that controlling a certain unit is technically impracticable or economically infeasible. We support the department's alternative compliance proposals as proposed on September 16th, and I flag that there are important changes in the September draft that are foundational to ensuring that Section 113 is workable for operators. As Kinder Morgan's counsel presented an opening statement, the board should give due weight to issues of technical practicality and economic reasonableness in crafting these rules. Adopting provisions that clearly articulate a workable process for individual alternative emissions standards based on these considerations is contemplated by the authority for this rulemaking. This is a very important, especially in circumstances where the cost to undertake a certain retrofit would be enormously expensive in comparison to the very small environmental benefit that the retrofit would achieve. I'd like to provide some additional background about why the individual alternate emissions standard process is so important. For this rulemaking, we evaluated certain case study units to understand the costs that would be required to comply with the originally proposed NOx standards. The case studies are summarized on this slide. Because the department provided comment on our caprock estimate, I will focus on that station today. I think it would be useful to walk through our process in calculating the cost to control caprock's 2 turbines. To start, because there is no other control option available for the 2 caprock GE Frame 3 units, as demonstrated by the letter from Baker Hughes that I included with my rebuttal testimony as attachment T, these units would require SCR. For the caprock units, we gathered a significant amount of data to determine the cost associated with installing the necessary SCR control. I won't linger on this slide, but the process we undertook to evaluate the cost per ton estimates was nothing short of exhaustive. This slide outlines our process, which took over 6 weeks to complete. I personally oversaw this data collection and analysis, spending about 120 hours of my time over approximately 3 months on this specific effort. With the cost data that we collected, we analyzed the cost effectiveness of purchasing and installing SCR at Caprock. The cost effectiveness is measured by dividing the total cost of the control by the total emissions reduced. This provides a dollar amount per ton of pollutant reduced. To calculate this cost per ton of For the amount of emissions reductions, we counted from baseline emissions to the applicable 50 ppm NOx limit. We did this because this measures the cost to achieve the actual proposed standard. Our capital investment estimate was based on a vendor quote. To annualize the capital investment, we used EPA's default interest rate and a 20-year life of control period, consistent with EPA's control cost manual. We based annual O&M costs on EPA's cost control spreadsheet. The results of this effort for Caprock are summarized on the chart shown on this slide. As our council presented in the opening statement, we researched cost effectiveness thresholds to understand the reasonableness of various costs. The highest threshold that we identified for NOx was 7,000 per ton of NOx reduced, which was a determination made by the New Mexico Environmental Department during the recent regional haze process. As you can see, the cost on a per ton basis of putting SCR on the units at Caprock, underlined in the far right column, are much higher than that threshold, at a roughly 80,000 and 55,000 per ton of NOx reduced. In Exhibit 1 to the department's rebuttal testimony, the department discussed our cost estimates for retrofitting the 2 turbines that drive our Caprock compressor station with SCR. In this discussion, the department states that there are 2 defects in the way that we calculated cost for the Caprock units, which they believe resulted in inflated cost estimates for the SCR installations. The department says that 1, we used unrepresentative baseline data, in particular, that our 3-year look back for operating hours was not representative. And 2, we limited emissions reductions to those needed to reach the applicable 50 ppm limit. First, we'd like to thank the department for its engagement with our direct testimony. In response to the concerns that the department raised, we conducted additional analysis on Caprock following the submittal of rebuttal testimony that I want to present here. For our first high-end analysis, we used a 10-year operating hour average multiplied by our most recent stack test result to calculate baseline emissions. We then calculated the tonnage reduction from the baseline to 50 ppm standard. We separately calculated the tonnage and assumed 70% efficiency from the
Mr. Trent,
SCR.
I think we had another
This control
glitch in-
efficiency assumption.
Mr. Trent,
Okay.
can you hear me? Yeah, I think it
I can hear
glitches
you.
and
Can
then
you hear me?
I can hear you. I think it will glitch sometimes and then it speeds up your voice. So I think we lost you at, we separately calculated.
Madam Hearing Officer, I'm sorry. Can I just say that I believe that Kinder Morgan agrees with the department's proposals currently, and I feel like this is a lot of testimony that's not really in the spirit of what the parties had decided, which was not going into extensive depth on things where we already had reached agreement. So I'm just wondering, I'm confused about that, I guess, at this point.
Ms. Gutierrez, do we
Yes,
misunderstand?
thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. And I understand your concern, Ms. Katz. I think from our perspective, in particular on the SIR rebuttal, there was information presented or response from the department that we feel is important to correct on the record. If Kinder Morgan didn't have an opportunity to present additional cost analysis in response to some of the statements in rebuttal, that sort of would just be left open-ended. So we think it's important to present this additional analysis that we completed.
Okay, but there's no actual changes that it's to the rule that this is supporting.
That's correct. We continue to support NMED's proposal on alternate compliance. I think from our perspective, we want to emphasize to the board how important this is, and this is part of the reason for doing that. I think, you know, unfortunately, without having heard testimony from other parties on, you know, where they stand, in particular, the one that we're going to hear on Friday, we do think it's important to set, you know, baseline on why these additional provisions are important.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gutierrez. Mr. Trent, thank you for speaking slowly, and I will continue to rely on Ms. Gutierrez to interrupt you in the event you are cutting out again.
Mr. Trent, are you still with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes, I think we separately calculated the tonnage.
Okay, we separately calculated the tonnage reduction using an assumed 70% efficiency from the SCR. This control efficiency assumption is consistent with the department's methodology. We then used each of these reductions to calculate the cost effectiveness of installing SCR using the cost information that we provided to the board in written testimony. The chart on this slide shows the results. The first row shows the original case that we submitted to the board, approximately 80,000 and 55,000 per ton. The second row shows the updated analysis, assuming reduction down to 50 ppm standard, 162,000 and 142,000 per ton. And the third row shows the updated analysis, assuming reduction based on a 70% control efficiency, 153,000 a ton and 114,000 per ton of NOx reduced. As you can see, the updated costs are even higher than our prior estimates. This is because these units were used more on average in the last 3 years, which was the original time frame we did the calculations on, than in the last 10 years on average. It is important to note that these units are not used at their full permit capacity in its alternative cost analysis. The department's high-end estimates assumed use of the turbines at their full permitted capacity. This is simply not reflective of our operation at Caprock and shouldn't be used to assess cost. We are trying to assess actual control cost for this station, and using an average of actual operating hours over some set period of time, be it 3 years or 10 years, is a more principled way to do that. This slide shows our low-end cost estimate. Here we also used a 10-year average to calculate the operating hours. However, this time, instead of using our most recent stack test, we multiplied our operating hours by our permitted operating limits in pounds per hour. This is the maximum that we are able to emit, so it is representative of the upper limit of our potential emissions. We again calculated reduction down to 50 ppm standard and separately calculated reductions based on a 70% control efficiency. As you can see, the cost to install the technology at Caprock remained very, very high and ultimately not cost effective at $114,000 and $49,000 per ton of NOx reduced. These costs illustrate the need for a clear and workable case-by-case alternative emissions standard process. In sum, we support the department's proposals for an alternative compliance plan and an individual alternative emission standard as reflected in the September 16th draft, and we ask the board to adopt those proposals. My testimony in this proceedings underscores why these provisions are critically important to ensure this set of rules as Section 113 is reasonable. That includes my summary of my direct, rebuttal, and sur-rebuttal testimony. Thank you again for the opportunity. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, and the panel is available for questions.
Thank you very much. Let me pause for a moment for other parties to turn on their camera with any questions. Not seeing questions from other parties. I'll turn now to the board. If you're an attendee on this platform and would have a question, please reach out through the chat. Madam Chair, do you have questions of the Kinder Morgan panel?
Thank you so much, Madam Hearing Officer. And like Ms. Katz mentioned, it seems like Kinder Morgan and NMED are in alignment and in agreement, right? And I think the technical testimony also supports that. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Just real quick, just out of curiosity, I know you have brought up the Caprock example. About how many other engines are in this category in terms of what Kinder Morgan has that would be really difficult or cost prohibitive to upgrade?
So Caprock has 2 GE Frame 3 units. And in this category, we have 10 of these units across 4 different stations.
And those are all in New Mexico?
Yes, there are 4 different compressor stations in the affected counties of this rule.
Okay. And how many other stations do you have in New Mexico? Other than these 10? Sorry.
Leslie, do you know off the top of your head?
I think in my testimony, we've identified 30 units that are potentially subject to this. I can't split out which ones may be too costly at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that. And thank you again for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
I don't have any questions at this time, but again, thank you for your testimony. That was very enlightening.
Thank you. Member Cates.
No questions right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Bitzer.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Garcia.
No questions. Thank you.
And Member Hunker.
No questions, thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Gutierrez, is there any follow-up?
I just have one follow-up question for clarification. I think the question from Chair Sweeney, if I understood it correctly, was how many compressor stations in the state of New Mexico does Kinder Morgan operate? And I don't think we have presented that data here, but we would be happy to follow up with that information and we can get that for the board.
I think we have 13 stations that are going to be subject to the rule. We have stations in New Mexico that are not in the subject counties, and I think our total in New Mexico is 23. But I would like the opportunity to follow up and make sure that's correct. That's approximately correct.
No further questions from me, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you, Ms. Gutierrez, Ms. Nolting, Mr. Brindley, Mr. Trent. Thank you all. Excuse you for the moment. If I read the spreadsheet correctly, we would go from here to the commercial disposal group. Is that true?
This is Casey Spall. I believe that's correct.
All right, Ms. Spall. And your witness is Witness Campsey, I believe I have already panelized your witness. Let me see. Is that true? Yes, Ashley Campsey. Ms. Campsey, let's do a sound check real quick.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you're a little soft, but we can hear you. If you would spell your name, please.
Ashley Campsie.
Thank you, and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Spall, if Ms. Kempsey starts cutting in and out, I'm going to recommend the camera trick. So thank you.
Sounds good. Are you ready?
Yep.
Campsey, did you offer written and rebuttal testimony in this matter?
Yes.
And Ms. Campsey's written direct testimony is Appendix B to see Commercial Disposal Group's notice of intent to file direct testimony. And her CV is attached to her testimony. And her rebuttal testimony is Appendix B to Commercial Disposal Group's notice of intent to file rebuttal testimony. Are there any objections to those exhibits?
Let me pause for a moment in the event that there are objections. I don't hear any. The exhibits are admitted.
Thank you. Ms. Campsey, please state your name and employer and your position for the board.
My name is Ashley Campsey. I'm president of Evergreen Environmental Engineering.
And what are your duties at Evergreen?
I own and operate all aspects of this firm, specializing in air quality support.
And could you please summarize your expertise as it relates to your testimony in these proceedings?
Yes, I have over 25 years of experience in public and private environmental sectors, a majority of which has been focused on developing a specialty in air quality permitting and compliance for the oil and gas industry. My past experience includes working as a permit writer for the Colorado Air Pollution Control Division, an environmental engineer for a large midstream oil and gas company, a senior project engineer manager for CH2M Hill, and served for 6 years as a commissioner on the Colorado Air Quality Control Commission. I'm a Colorado licensed professional engineer and have a Bachelor of Science degree in chemical engineering with an environmental emphasis.
Thank you. And could you give us a brief overview of the matter of your direct and rebuttal testimony that you filed? The topics that you addressed?
Yes, I submitted direct testimony regarding Section 113 on engines and turbines and Section 126 on produced water management units. I submitted rebuttal testimony in response to Section 113 and several definitions relating to Section 126.
And do you have any changes to that testimony?
No.
And do you adopt that testimony here today?
Yes, I do.
So the department proposes to revise Section 113 to require that engines be tested annually. Please explain your position on engine testing frequency as currently proposed by NMED.
We appreciate NMED's modification to the proposed rule and support NMED's current modifications with the exception of annual testing requirements. To be consistent with NSPS Quad J, we propose to change the language for testing in Section 113C4H from once per calendar year to once every 8760 hours of operation or 3 years, whichever comes first. When multiple rules apply to a source, it can be unnecessarily confusing to follow. If an engine is not running, it is not emitting emissions. 8760 hours is equivalent to a year of operation and arguably could be more frequent than once per calendar year. The testing is not conducted at the same time each year.
Therefore, those engines that operate consistently would effectively be tested annually. The 3 years ensures engines are still tested, even if they don't run often. In practical terms, compliance is being demonstrated without the burden of tracking 2 different testing requirements under 2 different rules. This proposed change would also eliminate the need to start up an engine just to test for those engines that don't operate regularly. Starting up an engine just for testing would create additional emissions not otherwise emitted if the engine is not operating. For these reasons, we recommend changing section 113C4H to testing once every 8760 hours of operation or every 3 years, whichever comes first.
Do you have any additional comments, Ms. Campsey?
Not at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Campsey is available for cross-examination.
Thank you very much, Ms. Spall and Ms. Campsey. I'll pause a moment in the event other parties would like to turn on their cameras. Question, Ms. Campsey. Seeing no one, I'll turn to the board for their questions. If you're an attendee on this platform and have a question, please reach out through the chat. Madam Chair, do you have questions?
Madam Hearing Officer, I don't have questions at this time.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
I don't have questions either, but thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you. Member Cates.
No questions. Thanks for the testimony.
Member Bitzer.
No questions. Thank you.
Member Garcia.
No questions. Thank you.
And Member Hunker.
No questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Spall and Ms. Campsey.
Thank you.
It is almost 2:45. We do need a break. Let's break until 3. And when we return, Ms. Katz, do I understand that we'll return to the department?
Yes, Madam Hearing Officer, very briefly.
All right. Thank you very much.